I apologise for the late start of this meeting. Eastern went on a little bit longer than expected, but not as long as last time, I have to say. So if we move to the main items of business, the minutes of our last meeting have been on the table before you for the last 30 minutes. Are you happy that I sign them as a true record? Thank you. Kumwar, do we have any apologies for absence?
Chairman, there were none. Thank you.
Jolly good. Declarations of interest?
None received.
Any from the committee that would like to declare at this point? No, jolly good. Any questions from the public?
I have not received any.
Or from members?
None.
Okay. I know there's no relevant updates, but Chris, would you like to run through the performance against government targets, please?
Thank you, Chairman. You'll see within the update sheet there's the agenda item 7, which is 2 tables. One table showing the performance against speed, and the other showing the quality indicator. In terms of the performance against speed, you'll see that we are, in terms of majors, the target is 60%, and we're above that, and also for the non-majors, so that's really positive. And also the quality target relates to appeals allowed, and we remain meeting that target at the moment. So they're both very positive. Thank you, Chairman.
Sorry, I've switched that off. Should we decide that a site inspection should be necessary as a result of our considerations this evening, these will be held on Monday the 8th of October at a time to be agreed at the meeting. Now, the first item, A1, which was referenced WA 2018-0566, land adjacent to 8 Mannerley Close, Milford, has been withdrawn subject to the officers resolving a technical matter. So move on to item A3, which is reference WA 2018-2308, Upland Stud, Bowlhead Green Road, Bowlhead Green, GU8 6NW. And I would invite Rebecca to present this application, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Right, so the site measures approximately 1.5 hectares and is located to the south of Bowlhead Green Road. It comprises a cluster of buildings which have a mixed equestrian, storage, workshop and residential use, together with areas of hard standing. Access into the site is provided off Bowlhead Green Road. If I just point that out. There are buildings within the Upland Stud complex which fall outside of the current application site, and I'll just point those out. So this is known as the Water Tower to the south, and then we've got the Stallion boxes, and both of those are in residential use but fall outside the current application site line. So turning to an aerial shot to put the site into more context, you'll see Hazelmere Road provided shown to the east, with Bowlhead Green Road coming off and providing access into the site. So I'm going to show members 3 slides of photographs, starting firstly with the entrance of Bowlhead Green Road. So the access is shown in the top left photo, and as you drive up the road, you'll look across to your left-hand side and see the Upland Stud complex and the existing buildings in the background. As you're driving along the southern road, you'll see the existing sand school. And then further along, you'll see those 2 buildings which I've just mentioned that fall outside of the application site line, and then the start of the building subject of the current application site. So this slide shows the existing buildings which are to the southern end of the site. Members will see the existing courtyard with the residential units going around the courtyard, and the stables. We've got an office building here, and then this is looking down the far eastern site boundary towards the very top of the site. And this is showing the existing buildings, what would be to the north of the existing site. So looking back up to the access road and the sand school. Again, members will just see these were some of the existing residential units. and some of the storage buildings. So I'll go into the proposal in more detail, but this just shows the comparison between the existing site buildings and then the proposed scheme. So the current application is in outline form with the matters of layout, scale and access to be determined at this stage, and the matters of appearance and landscaping would be reserved. Outline permission is sought for the erection of 15 residential dwellings following the demolition of all existing buildings on site. As I mentioned, there are some existing residential units on site. There are currently 9, so the proposal would amount to a net gain of 6 dwellings. All of the units would be market housing, comprising a mixture of 2, 3 and 4 bed units. And taking the matters to be considered at this outline stage in turn, firstly, access. Access would remain as existing and would be off Bullhead Green Road to the north. In terms of layout, all of the dwellings would be located on land which is currently occupied by the existing buildings and hardstanding. They would be served by a central spine road with the proposed dwellings to the east and west. All of the dwellings would benefit from private amenity space along with parking, and the parking would be provided in a mixture of garages and allocated parking spaces. Turning next to scale, the height of the buildings would be a maximum 2-storey, and some of the units would be 1.5 stories in height. There has been a previous scheme on the application site. This was for the erection of 9 residential dwellings and was refused by the council in January 2017. The scheme was also in outline form with layout, access and scale to be determined, and the block plan of this previously refused scheme can be seen on the current slide. As members will see, the layout has been amended since the previous proposal is far more fluid than the previous refused scheme. So just turning to the proposed parking and refuse areas, there would be, so the parking areas are shown in red, and then the refuse and cycle stores are shown in green. There would be a total of 41 parking spaces provided within the site, which would exceed the requirement as set out in the council's parking guidelines. Turning to the scale and the building heights, so the applicant has sought to show how the proposed built form would correspond with the existing building heights. The site is largely split into 2 zones. The applicant has set out Zone A and Zone B, with sort of single storey moving on to 1.5 and to 2-storey. And on the right-hand side, members will see that this is a sort of a comparison showing the existing built form at those locations and how the proposed development would correspond to the building heights. As members will see, some of the chimneys would exceed the current existing build height line, and marginally some of the roof. So as set out, the appearance of dwellings would be determined at a reserved matter stage should outline permission be granted. However, the applicant has submitted some illustrative elevations which are shown on the current slide, along with a design code which has been submitted. So this sets out general points in relation to the appearance, and officers would wish to secure a high quality design by incorporating this as part of the Section 106 agreement should outline permission be granted. So the following 2 slides will provide members with some sort of visual illustrative watercolour drawings of what the proposal could look like, and it does show some of the details that would be secured as part of the design code. So this first one shows the approach to the site, and then turning to the second one, this then would be looking from south into the site towards the north. If I can just quickly turn members' attention, there is an update sheet. We have had a response received from South East Water since the drafting of the agenda report, and they have confirmed their statutory obligation to supply water to the site. The determinant issues are set out on the slide before members now. Officers consider that sufficient detail has been submitted to demonstrate that, subject to a detailed consideration at any future stage, the scheme could provide for a high-quality design. Officers consider the proposal would be acceptable in greenbelt terms and would actually result in a visual improvement over and above the existing built form on site. As mentioned, parking provision would exceed the parking guidelines, and subject to a number of conditions, no concern is raised with regard to residential amenity, highway safety, the conservation area or ecology. Members will be aware of the planning history in the existing Section 106 agreement from the committee agenda reports. As members will see within that, there is an existing Section 106 agreement which is attached to a 1998 permission on the land that's set out in the planning history section. This Section 106 agreement relates to a section of the land which falls within the current application site. This is shown yellow on the plan on screen and relates to what was formerly known as the former stables, which is now residential units. There has been an appeal which has been recently upheld in relation to the discharge of the Section 106 obligations as a whole. Should members be minded to agree with the officer recommendation this evening, they can be rest assured that the Section 106 agreement will remain capable of being enforced against insofar as it relates to the stallion boxes and the water tower, which are the two buildings which fall outside the current application site. However, as the current proposal would result in the demolition of all existing buildings on the lands, including the area shown in yellow, and new buildings would then be built on the lands, the ability of enforcing the Section 106 clauses would fall away for the area in yellow. The new Section 106 agreement, which is set out as a requirement within the officer recommendation, would capture the removal of the restriction on the land for selling or disposing of the former stables. So again, I'm talking about this area coloured in yellow. So just to provide a verbal update, and I've popped the wording on the screen as it's quite a lengthy recommendation, but the officer recommendation A has been updated to reflect that capturing within the new Section 106 agreement. So that is a revised recommendation A, and the recommendation B remains as set out within the agenda report. So members will see that the officer recommendation is that permission be granted subject to the measures set out in recommendation A. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Rebecca. This application is subject to public speaking, and I would first invite Heidi Copland on behalf of the objectors to speak, please. Good evening. I'm sure the procedure has been explained to you, and you have 4 minutes from when you start speaking.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. My name's Heidi Copland. I'm a planning solicitor from DMH Stallard, and I'm speaking in objection to this application tonight on behalf of Mr. Robert Cook, who is the direct neighbour of the application site, to express his concerns about the application. We're surprised that this application is being recommended for approval, given that it proposes a significant new built form, 15 dwellings in total, which you've heard are all market units with no affordable housing and located within the greenbelt and a protected landscape. Your officer's report advises that within the greenbelt there is a general presumption against inappropriate development, which is by definition harmful and should not be approved except in very special circumstances. It also advises that the planning history of the site is a material consideration. We concur with this. It is material to the consideration of this application that the Council refused planning permission only last year for a smaller scheme of 9 residential units on the site. And there were a number of reasons for refusal of that application, but importantly, the Council were not satisfied that there were very special circumstances to outweigh the harm to the greenbelt. They had concerns about the impact of the development on the Surrey Hills AONB, an area of great landscape value, and they found that it did not provide a satisfactory mix of housing. It's also material that an inspector has recently upheld the Council's decision not to discharge the Section 106 agreement, which was entered into at the time that the planning permission was granted for a change of use of the stable and stallion blocks to provide staff and student accommodation. The purpose of that Section 106 agreement was to permanently restrict or regulate the development of the land, and it was considered necessary in view of planning policy. In essence, it sought to tie the occupation of the residential units to the equestrian use of the site. As the inspector stated in her report, it's clear from the wording of the Section 106 agreement that it sought to facilitate development which would otherwise have been unacceptable. It is perhaps unfortunate that a breach of the Section 106 agreement has occurred, and that the independent residential occupation of 9 units on the site has been certified as lawful. but that doesn't alter the importance of the agreement and its aims. The inspector was clear in her reasoning in concluding that despite the grant of the lawful development certificates, the Section 106 still serves a useful planning purpose. And she put the safeguarding of the greenbelt at the heart of her decision, concluding that it served a useful planning purpose insofar as it safeguarded the greenbelt from inappropriate development and the countryside from encroachment, and that in the absence of the agreement, the use of the site could have a significant adverse impact on the openness of the greenbelt. It's difficult to reconcile the inspector's reasoning with the recommendation that is before you today. The inspector gives protection of the greenbelt priority. And this is supported by the government in the National Planning Policy Framework, which advises that it attaches great importance to greenbelts. The approval of this planning application will render the Section 106 agreement unenforceable in the main part and will compromise the greenbelt. Your officer advises you that you need to consider the weight to attribute to the appeal decision, and we think that great weight should be given to it, and we invite you to do so. It's also material that the only real justification for this application arises out of a breach of planning control, which is the original unlawful occupation of the residential units. Your council has an up-to-date local plan with a five-year housing land supply, and there's no very special circumstances that have been given to approve this application. So we, in effect, invite you today to refuse the application. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I now invite Councillor Peter Hunter of the Thursley Parish Council.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, my name is Peter Hunter, previous Chair of Thursley Parish Council, now Vice Chair, and have been a councillor for many years, and am very much aware of all the activities that have taken place on this subject site over the years. And I have to say that I and my colleagues remain confused over the relationship with the Section 106 agreement of 1988-89 and the current planning process. Let me be very clear, in case there's any misunderstanding. This establishment still operates as an equestrian facility with many liveries and staffed with very qualified resident trainer from Germany. Perhaps not so profitable as current intent would perhaps allow. Thursley Parish Council remain in objection to this proposed development on the grounds that it is basically a change from semi-agricultural environment to a residential one, and as such would pose a threat to the farming community. This development represents a 100% increase in Bowlhead Green, indeed a completely new hamlet. Paragraph 78 in FPPF 2018 clearly states local planning authorities should avoid isolated homes in the countryside unless there are very special circumstances. We do not believe there are such special circumstances. We find it incomprehensible that the planning officer should reject the earlier application of 9 units and now recommend approval of 15. The statement net gain of 6 dwellings is misleading in the extreme. Currently 672 square metres of dwelling to be replaced by habitable accommodation of 2,677, a 4-fold increase. The claim that this would equal a 47% reduction in built form is slightly perverse when comparing agricultural barn buildings with domestic houses. Can it really be that I can hide for 4 years or more the residential use of former stable blocks that I then convert to a legal standing and then convert that to formal 2- to 4-bed houses? Is this the real intent of planning laws? Surely this would be setting a dangerous precedent, not just in Waverley, but nationwide. Can it be that the expressed views of Thursley Parish Council and objections from the local community are ignored? We disagree with the statement on page 99 of the officer report that the objections of the Parish Council and 47 others have been carefully considered. Local roads cannot sustain the increase of these motor vehicles. In the words of Benjamin Disraeli, lies, damn lies, and statistics. and so is the basis of the current traffic movements used by TRICS database, which is inconsistent with the reality of Upland Stud. Or, should I say, Upland Stud does not represent the basis of the TRICS database. I would encourage reading of the report by motion of Guildford, which completely destroys the original assumptions. Furthermore, when assessing the future traffic associated with 15 family dwellings, insufficient consideration has been given to today's norm of multiple courier deliveries, not to mention their often displayed recklessness of the drivers. These are not just narrow roads, they are single-track roads. The construction plan provides the limitation of vehicles of 7.5 gross weight tonnes. It is unrealistic. Surrey County Council recommends compensation for highway damage. We cannot understand why any developer would want to build such expensive houses for equestrian staff. Can I therefore urge members of this committee to listen to the views of the community and respect the words of the inspector, as well as sending a clear message to Waverley residents that Borough Council will always seek to uphold the principles of agreements made in its name and under their charge. Thank you. Sorry for overstepping the line.
Thank you, Councillor Hunter. I invite David Jobbins to speak in support of the application.
Thank you, Chairman, members. Firstly, thank you for allowing me to address you today. I'd also like to thank your officers for what is a very full and comprehensive report. I'd also add that your officers have been thoroughly scrutinised and assessed our proposals in the light of the new NPPF and also your adopted local plan. The recommendation to approve is therefore well-founded and should not be dismissed lightly. Turning to the scheme itself, the site is clearly brownfield or previously developed land and is currently occupied by substantial, somewhat rather unfortunate industrial-style buildings used, as you know, as a commercial stud farm, 9 dwellings, car repair business and large areas of concrete hardstanding. I was very grateful for you taking the time to visit the site. In distinct contrast, our proposals are extremely well designed and will result in the removal of all the unsightly buildings and reduce the overall volume of buildings on the site by 47%. This will inevitably have a beneficial and positive effect on the Greenbelt and AONB. In addition, the density is 10.7 dwellings per hectare, which again is extremely low. In addition, site coverage is also reduced by in the order of 41%. I would like to draw your attention, quite importantly, to para 145 of the NPPF from 2018, which refers to the Greenbelt. And it gives exceptions to inappropriate development, one of which is, and I quote, the partial or complete redevelopment of previously developed lands such as this, whether redundant or in continuing use, provided it would not have a greater impact on the openness of the Greenbelt than the existing development. Well, clearly, Chairman, members, in our view, that is very much the case here. It will be the removal of those large, unrelenting buildings, the introduction of 15 well-designed properties, which will also include additional landscaping, spaces between buildings, and, as I said, well-designed properties. So clearly, in NPPF terms, this is not inappropriate development, provided you agree that the impact of the dwellings is less than the existing buildings on the site, which we contend is. The design has also been the subject of much discussion with your officers, both before the application was submitted and after, including your design officer, who, along with the AONB officer, commends the scheme to you. And I would actually like to agree that the previous scheme, the one that was refused, was not appropriate for this site. They comprised all large dwellings, somewhat suburban style, and I would tend to agree that that was the right decision to make on that application. Our application, however, is significantly different. With respect to highways, it is quite right that I respectfully remind members that this site already has the potential to generate traffic. It is clearly not a greenfield site. And that potential includes larger, slow-moving horse boxes, associated equine traffic, traffic from the existing 9 dwellings, and also the industrial uses. And as a consequence, and understandably, the County Highways Officer has raised no objections to the scheme. In essence, what we're proposing is 6 additional dwellings, but the removal of the commercial stud, which has implications for traffic, and the removal of the B2 industrial use at the bottom of the site. It's also been referred to the Section 106 agreement. The existing Section 106 agreement also refers to potential planning applications, and it does not fetter you whatsoever in relation to this application. In fact, clause 2.3 is quite positive and does allow you to grant planning permission for alternative proposals. It does not prevent development as such. In terms of the recent appeal, again, the inspector accepted that the site is better looked at holistically, i.e. through this application, in my view. I would therefore ask you to agree with your officer's robust recommendation to grant planning permission for the site. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jobbins, and very well timed as well, I might add.
Lucky, sir. Thank you.
I now invite the ward councillor, Councillor Jenny Else, to speak.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to repeat some of which has already been said. I'm sorry. I am sorry about that, but I do feel that this is such an important issue that it's well to get these things firmly into your minds before you start your debate, if I may. So in 2006, an application for 9 dwellings was submitted for this site, and it was refused for various reasons, mostly concerned with the green belt, the AONB, the AGLV, and the countryside in general. With regard to impact on the green belt, the reason given for refusal was that the replacement dwellings were considered to be materially larger in terms of floor space, together with the form, bulk and height of the proposal in comparison to the existing buildings. Furthermore, the proposed development would not amount to an exception to the presumption against inappropriate development in the green belt, as it leads to a greater impact on the openness on the green belt than the existing development, and various special circumstances had not been demonstrated. It was considered to be contrary to the Waverley Local Plan 2002 and the NPPF. Now, in 2018, with an increase from 9 to 15 dwellings, the recommendation is to grant this application for the following reason. Overall, officers consider that the current scheme has been sufficiently amended such that, having regard to size, scale, siting and form of the proposed dwellings, the scheme would not result in any additional harm to the openness of the green belt than the existing situation, and it would furthermore result in an improvement to the openness of the green belt over and above the existing belt form. With regard to development within AONB and AGLV, in 2006 the reason for refusal given was, whilst the removal of the non-residential buildings may justify some of the dwellings being larger than the existing very small dwellings, the extent proposed was not acceptable. 9 family-sized houses were much larger than the existing residential units, and officers considered that the proposal was inappropriate for the AONB and by extension the AGLV. It was considered to be contrary to the Waverley Local Plan 2002, the emerging draft local plan, the NPPF and the AONB management plan. Now, in 2018, with an increase from 9 to 15 dwellings, the recommendation is to grant this application for the following reasons. It is considered that the scheme would positively contribute to the ONB and the AGLV in accordance with the local plan 2018. In 2016, officers decided that with regard to the character and beauty of the countryside, the design and urbanising impact of 9 dwellings would result in material visual harm to the rural character of the area and to the intrinsic character, beauty and openness of the countryside. The application at that time was for 1 line of houses. Now you are being asked to consider 2 lines of houses facing each other. 15 houses with drives, parking, garaging, patios, etc. must result in an increase in urbanisation and ground cover, more so than 9 houses. Here we are less than 2 years later. The character, beauty and openness of the area has not changed, and so it's hard to understand how the decision to recommend approval has come about. There's no consistency demonstrated here. Instead, there is an almost complete about-face in that reasons for refusal in 2016 are now being cited as reasons for approving in 2018. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you. Members. Councillor Week.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very pleased so many of us were able to make the site visit on Monday. Highly illuminating. When one considers the original design of the place, the 9 dwellings were supposed to be tied cottages. In other words, the people were working and living there. They weren't supposed to be commuting. Trying to get to this site, well, I almost missed the turning because I met a dirty great tanker, which fortunately pulled off the road, but it was blocking where I needed to go. So I ended up going right the way up to the Hazelmere turning and I had to come back again. There is no room to go. I know people were backing up for minis. That road is an accident waiting to happen. So it's even like that at 2 o'clock on an ordinary afternoon. I just can't imagine what it must be like in rush hour. And I know it seems unfortunate that these days we don't seem to be paying so much attention to the preservation of commercial business. We saw the body workshop actually carrying on its business. It hasn't been standing there empty for years. I just don't quite understand where this is going, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Follows.
Share the concerns of my colleagues there, I think, across the board. I just wanted to ask a couple of questions for the planning officers. Just to for my own sake, can you just explain to me that the businesses, are they all closing on this site or are they all carrying on? It was just not clear, I think, from various places that was coming from there. Secondly, can you just explain what the process is for a commuted sum towards affordable housing? Because if we're looking at reasons to take this out of the green belt, for me, actually providing affordable housing is about one of the very few things that would do that, and this isn't doing that. So could you just explain how that works, please?
Officers, would you like to respond?
Thank you, Chairman. Right, so firstly, in terms of the existing businesses on site, obviously as part of the scheme, all the existing buildings would be demolished, so the businesses would have to close. I am aware that the car business is currently in existence. I don't know what terms of lease they have in terms of how much longer they can continue on site, but the proposal would result in the loss of all the existing buildings, so there would inevitably be a closure of the business in that respect. Just secondly, the commuted sum for affordable housing. So because of the net gain of dwellings in this instance, there wouldn't be a trigger for on-site affordable housing. So it would trigger a need for a commuted sum. So that's what we could secure, and that is set out in the officer recommendation. Thank you, Chairman.
Chairman,
may I just come back?
So just to be clear, the businesses are not moribund. They're operating, they're working, they're making a profit, they're functioning, and this site would, this scheme would close them. Is that what we're saying?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, in essence, I've got to be honest, I don't know about the viability of the existing building businesses on site, but yes, the proposal would result in the loss of those businesses. Sorry, I'm just being told that there was another point on Greenbelt. Just to confirm, it's not allocated to come out of the Greenbelt. What officers are saying is that the proposal would be acceptable in Greenbelt terms, just to clarify. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor James.
Thank you, Chairman. It's the very special circumstances to change anything. What concerns me is that in the agenda papers, what the officers are saying is that by removing all the barns and the hard standing and putting 15 little twee houses would enhance. Therefore, that's what they're saying is the very special circumstance. Does that mean that we are now not going to allow agricultural buildings, farmers who want cattle courts, i.e. Rockwood? Do you remember that one, the great big cattle court? But because it didn't sort of look good in the green belt, but we allowed that because we need agricultural buildings in agricultural land in the green belt. So no chicken farms, nothing like that, but we can put pretty little houses. I am really concerned that the very special circumstances are to remove agricultural buildings, stables, all those things which were allowed to be changed into residential because they were going to be part not removed from the main house, which is in the S106, page 2, little 2. All the residential accommodation is provided shall not be disposed of separately from the main house. Well, this, unless all these 15 people are going to be residential to the main house, and then there's no traffic. Of course, they'll all be working there, but they've got nowhere to work now because all the barns are coming down. And so that, it really worries me. And at the moment with the traffic, because they are supposedly in the 106 agreement to be part of the stud farm, they don't commute to work because they're working there. Therefore, the traffic should be minimal. But if, of course, the residents that are there, which they shouldn't be, are elsewhere, then that's a different matter. And then the 106 agreement isn't being abided by. But I am really concerned because it means that in officers, and I don't normally criticise officers, but if their opinion is that agricultural barns, cattle courts, chicken sheds are better in the green belt than twee little residential things, then I am very concerned. Thank you, Chairman.
Beth, did you wish to make a comment before I move on to other members?
Exceptions is the partial or complete redevelopment of previously developed land, which this site is wholly contained within the red line, previously developed land. And in such instances, very special circumstances are not required to be demonstrated in support of the application.
Thank you. Councillor Tom Martin.
Thank you, Chairman. A couple of points, and apologies if this is somewhat scattered. Firstly, if members are minded to approve this, can I strongly suggest that we put in a condition to remove the future permitted development rights on this? Given that we are, there's a very important aspect of this about size of buildings, floor space, and the comparison between what's there and what could be there. Any future additions to that would materially affect essentially our decision making right now. And I did look through the conditions, and I don't believe there is anything that removes permitted development rights for the future. But if there is, then that's fantastic. Moving on to my concerns, we've talked a bit about green belts, building in the green belts. And indeed, we've been cautioned in this very chamber about the requirement for these very special circumstances. In fact, the current head of planning has chastised us for considering the very tiny extensions to properties in the green belt on the grounds that they do not fulfil very special circumstances. And I fail to see that this development fulfills that criteria, particularly given the recent 106 challenge. And I think it's likely that this would be supported by an inspector. Page 80 itself says local planning authorities should avoid new isolated homes in the countryside unless there are very special circumstances. This, to me, looks like it's pretty isolated. Yes, there are a number of homes, but there's very little beyond that. I mean, this is a pretty unsustainable location, given the site's proximity to, well, very little. Following on from that, I'm struggling to understand why we're not also considering a change of use for this site. There are businesses on site, and yet we don't see a change of use. If we were seeing a change of use, there would be an argument that there has been no marketing of the business units, there's been no marketing of this. There are businesses that are operating there at the moment. These are not vacant, and I don't believe, therefore, that meets the criteria for change of use, albeit that I accept that that's not in front of us at the moment. Arguing that this is only a small increase on what is already there is also pretty difficult for me to accept, given that as Councillor Wheatley said, that the homes that are there were built as tied properties, and therefore you would expect those people living there would be working on site and therefore not producing vehicle movements. understand people coming into the site to use it would be using them. Certainly, this development, anybody who is working and living in these properties will be commuting off-site, unless they're working from home. There is no affordable home provision, and it seems that even the commuted sum is, there's some dispute as to exactly what it should be or what it shouldn't be. And as Councillor Follows has said, I think I'd rather have an affordable home than a commuted sum. That's an awful lot more useful to us. If I might ask officers another direct question, finally, if members agree that this application does not meet very special circumstances for building in the green belts, and I strongly believe that this is a judgment call as opposed to a technical issue, is that an acceptable reason for refusal? I'd appreciate an answer on that before we come to make our decision. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that your first point about permitted development is covered by condition 20, which removes it. But officers, would you like to respond to Councillor Martin's other points? Chris.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to reiterate one point in terms of greenbelt policy, you've got paragraph 145 of the MPPF, and that says that local planning authorities should regard the construction of new buildings as inappropriate development in the greenbelt. Exceptions to this are so it falls within one of the in one of the exceptions. Under, well, in officer's opinion, it falls under G, which is the limited infill or partial or complete redevelopment of previously developed land. Which would not have a greater impact on the openness of the green belt and would not cause substantial harm to the openness of the green belt. That's why there's not a second arm that comes in terms of very special circumstances in this instance. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. You had a question about reasons for refusal as well, I think.
Yes, and I appreciate. I'd quite like an answer on why this isn't a change of use on the site.
Rebecca?
Sorry, thank you, Chairman. In effect, I guess it would be a change of use in the sense that there's a mixed use on site at the moment, and then it would go to residential units. However, it's an application in its own right for redevelopment of the land, which would fall under an exception set out, as Chris has just said. So, you know, the MPPF does not refer to sort of change of use as being unacceptable in the green belt. So it would fall under an exception, and in its own right, officers are satisfied that it would be acceptable in the green belt in that regard. Just picking up momentarily on the judgment that you mentioned and the very special circumstances, I think you're referring to the fact that there is maybe a judgment to be expressed in terms of whether there would be any difference in terms of the impact on the openness of the green belt, and if members decided that they felt that it didn't fall within paragraph 145, the exceptions, then I guess that is a judgment, and there could be a reason for refusal in that regard. Can I just also pick up on another point that's come up, I think, a couple of times, in terms of the occupation of some of the units by employees of the site? Just to confirm, I think which ones members are referring to, and if I can just put the plan up here. So it would only be those current residential units highlighted in yellow, which are caught by that need to be occupied in connection with the equestrian use of the land. So it wouldn't be all of the residential units as existing, it would just be those 2 units. So just to clarify, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I do have some difficulties with this application. I mean, we're talking about special circumstances, and now we're told we don't need any special circumstances, which is probably just as well, because I can't see any special circumstances why we should be approving this scheme. It is a very isolated location. I have a couple of friends who live in or very close to Bullhead Green, And at the moment when I go and visit, actually I don't see a lot of traffic, so I can imagine that this sort of development would increase the traffic. But it's going to be a large increase in the population of Bullhead Green, which as we know is a very small hamlet with 15 houses, so this would, as we've been told, double it in size. There are no transport links at all, so you have to use a car, and all the access routes into it are single track. So, I mean, the access also to, well, for drivers and actually for construction traffic is going to be extraordinarily difficult. And then we're talking also that there is no affordable housing, and there may be reasons why that is not to be provided on site, but a commuted sum of £238,000 is not going to buy you very much affordable housing in this part of the world, I'm afraid. So I have some great difficulties with this application. I have got one question, though. One of the contributions being sought are for highways improvements to improve the passing bays on the single tracks leading to this, but we're only asking for £5,000. Now, I know full well how much it costs to just repair a small bridleway. We've sort of rebuilt a very small pedestrian wooden bridge in Godalming, and that was something like £30,000. So unless Councillor Martin Senior will tell me otherwise, I do not think £5,000 is going to buy you very much in terms of highway improvements. And I just wondered who came up with that sum. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll let the officers ponder that one. I'll move on to Councillor Peter Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I find this really quite perplexing. I was interested in the visit, which I was a part of on Monday. I find it really quite perplexing that we have an application for 9 houses a couple of years ago, which was refused, and now we've got an application for 15 houses, which we're proposing to accept. On the face of it, that seems very strange to me. What we have here is a working environment with 2 of the 9 houses as effectively tied accommodation and can't be sold or disposed of separately from the main house. And we're going to 15 completely standalone houses. It seems to me that we have a density of housing which is much greater than was proposed before, or which now exists, although I accept the buildings that these are replacing are substantial, large and sort of semi-agricultural as well as smaller housing. So, you know, it seems to me there is a significant impact on the environment with a greater density of housing, far more residents, far more traffic that's being generated. So I find it very difficult to square a refusal 2 years ago with an acceptance now. And I don't think that there are sufficient changes from the one to the other. So, and I accept also the impact on the access. It is a very narrow road. And I accept entirely that £5,000 is negligible in terms of creating additional passing bays. So my question to the officers is that you so far have come up with a recommendation to accept with what your judgment is on the MPPF. You can see, I think, that most of the councillors here are rather inclined the other way around. Can you now, bearing that in mind, say, well, actually, there are objections based upon density, scale, and so on and so forth that would make it a reasonable thing for us to refuse the application. Thank you.
Thank you. Officers, would you like to respond?
Thank you, Chairman. Firstly, if I can just pick up on the contributions. So the £5,000, that is a contribution that's been requested from the County Highway Authority. So that's come from them, and that's the amount that they've put forward, requested and justified. Secondly, in terms of the objections based on density, scale, layouts, obviously those matters are all material planning considerations which are, you know, matters of judgment before members. So if members feel so inclined, then they could put forward a reason for refusal on those grounds. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor James, you wish to come back?
I do. Thank you very much, Chairman. Could the officers, I've got one question, on previously developed land, brownfield sites. Does that mean that every cattle court, every barn within Waverley in agricultural land is previously developed land? Every single one. Therefore, anybody could come back next week, if we allowed this, to say, I don't want my barn anymore, it's a brownfield site, I'd like to put a beautifully designed little twee country cottage on it, and we would not have any reason to refuse it, because we're allowing 15 to go ahead.
Officers.
One second.
Okay, Councillor Lee, would you like to make a point while the officers are considering that?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I think most of the points have already been well made that I was concerned about, not least by our two former public speakers. And I thank them for the clarity of their explanation and the factual nature of their explanation and the lack of emotion. I didn't have the benefit of being able to go on the trip to the site, unfortunately. I did have a look at Google Maps, and clearly the access road to this site is a true country lane at the best, if not a country track. Therefore, it cannot sensibly support the types of traffic that we can expect to a development like this. And those traffic flows, I'm not really talking about how often they're happening, but the nature of them with DHL and UPS vans and things like Waitrose. They are quite large vehicles, to say nothing of the possibility of the vehicles of these particular residents. I've got to say that I did appreciate receiving, I think we all did, didn't we, this particular pack, which is extremely helpful in the size of the format, and also the pictorials are helpful. However, when I look at this, and bearing in mind it is in a very rural part of the world, I become a little troubled when the company is called Urban Design Group. And I just wonder which part, if they've got rural expertise, or is it all urban expertise that is being applied to this, this development. Now, in terms of the proposed layout, the typical layout, I personally don't have any objections with the outside of the house designs, or from what I can tell on the inside designs. It's just that I don't really think they are suitable for this particular location. I'm also disturbed by this pictorial which shows the route into the site. There is no accommodation there for foot traffic. Therefore, I believe all the families will be totally and utterly dependent on vehicles. And one of the aspects, one of the concerns of this council is the amount of pollution that there is about. And here we've got a possibility of a high centre of pollution creation. And I really don't think that that is good. And thinking forward, perhaps people move into there and they would be highly physically mobile. Later on in life, the legs don't stand up to it, and there'll be mobility scooters perhaps around, and so on and so forth. This is not a site that sort of caters for the expected sort of family mix that you know, we should be catering for in terms of a responsible council. So what has already been said, I support strongly, and I just sort of add those perhaps slightly different dimensions to my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Councillor Holder, and then I'll invite Chris to come back to answer a few of the queries.
Thank you, Chairman. After the northbound turn to Leadcoach Road was closed about 3 years ago, I now use Bullhead Green Lane, or used to use Bullhead Green Lane, to get to Whitley. However, the times that I've been on that very narrow one track, I've met cars coming up in the opposite direction, and rather like Councillor one is having to back quite considerably, and that, as it is at the moment, I now go down Beach Hill and Park Lane in order to get to Whitley. That lane is completely inappropriate for any further development. It just cannot take the traffic, and therefore I think this whole application is completely inappropriate. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris, did you want to respond to some of the points raised?
Thank you, Chairman. It's a couple of points of clarification, really. In terms of the definition of previously developed land, which is contained within the MPPF, it does clarify that that it doesn't include the definition excludes land for agriculture and forestry buildings. So I think there was a concern that agricultural buildings would form part of previously developed land. That the definition excludes that. The other point is in terms of the greenbelt policy that we. The other point in terms of the greenbelt policy, we consider that it complies with one of the exceptions, which is the limited infill or partial or complete redevelopment of previously developed land. In order to comply, it would have to have no greater impact on the openness of the greenbelt than the existing, or cause harm to the openness of the greenbelt where the development would reuse previously developed land and contribute. So that is a judgment, and that is the judgment that we've made on that. If it was to fail that, it wouldn't meet any of the exceptions. Then the very special circumstances would come into play as to whether they had demonstrated any or not. That's when that would come into play. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chris. Councillor Tom Martin, you wish to come back?
Thank you. One very quick question for officers, please. The MPPF document with this paragraph 145 that has been mentioned, was that part of planning law in 2016? It was. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Follows, you wish to come back?
So to request for future applications, if it's involving the removal of businesses that are on the site, if they can just give us some, at least bare bones information about what those businesses are doing, whether they're actually going to be on the site or whether there's going to be part of the development in some way, because actually we don't know enough about that in that particular element. Otherwise, I believe we should move to a vote in support of the parish and the objections raised.
Thank you. Councillor Upton, before I move to the recommendation.
Well, I have a major concern with the rural economy, and I don't like sites that have been run down, which could be used gainfully if they were put back to use again and probably employ people in the local area. And what they've done is shut down a facility that is ready to be used. They'd have to work their own arithmetic out as to how to get it best used, but to me, that is an employable area on the rural economy, and there isn't enough in that area now anyway. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Else, before we move to the recommendation, did you wish to sum up? Come back?
Thank you very quickly, Chairman. Thank you very much. We've had a good debate on this and it's been interesting to listen to. There are many reasons, in my view, not to support Officer's recommendation. We've heard about the anomalies between this recommendation for approval and the last one for refusal. We've heard about narrow single-track lanes and the increase in traffic. We've heard about current active commercial use. We've heard about isolated homes and how they should be avoided, threat to the farming community, and importantly, the potential to come close to doubling the population of this small hamlet. So thank you very much for letting me come back.
Thank you. Members, if you're happy, I'll move to the recommendation from the officers. This is the revised recommendation that Rebecca explained earlier, that subject to the completion of a Section 106 agreement to secure appropriate contributions towards off-site highway works, a commuted sum towards affordable housing, and adherence to a design code as part of any reserved matters application, together with a variation of the existing Section 106 dated the 13th of August 1999 to remove the restriction on the disposal of the area known as the former stables. Conditions and affirmatives, permissions be granted. All those in favour? None. All those against? That's unanimous. So that application is refused. Could I have a proposition for the refusal and a seconder, please? Councillor Tom.
Thank you, Chairman. I think I would...
Can you just propose it? And then
okay, in which case then I
then
would propose that we refuse this application.
Thank you. And Councillor Follows has seconded.
I second.
Could we have some reasons, please?
Well, I think they are essentially set out on page 73 and 74 of the agenda papers. I would suggest we go with reasons along the lines of the original reasons for refusal of the original application 1 to 5. There may need to be some tweaking of policy numbers possibly, but essentially I think the same reasons for refusal stand. If the MPPF document was valid in 2016, then it is no more or less valid now. And I think given that this is stacked up in front of an inspector, then it will stack up again. Thank you.
Any comments on that before we move to the revised recommendation?
Thank you, Chairman. Having listened to all of the members' comments tonight, I've got some suggested wordings. There's 3 reasons for refusal that I've sort of taken from your comments. So if I read them out, and then obviously members can decide whether they are in agreement. So firstly, taking on board the comments that have been made in terms of the location and its isolation. The application site is in an isolated location. The proposed development would not fall within any of the circumstances set out in paragraph 79 of the MPPF 2018. The proposal would therefore result in the provision of isolated dwellings in conflict with paragraph 79. Secondly, taking into account the comments with regards to density, scale, suburban layout, impact on rural character, I've combined those into one. The proposal, by reason of the number of dwellings, its density, scale and suburban layout, would result in an overdevelopment of the site and a harmful impact on the rural character of the surrounding area. The proposal would fail to satisfactorily conserve the landscape character and scenic beauty of the AONB and AGLV. The proposal would therefore fail to comply with policies RE3 and TD1 of the Local Plan 2018, retain policies D1 and D4, and then a number of paragraphs set out in the MPPF. And then thirdly, taking into account the comments that have been made in terms of the greenbelt and the acceptability in principle of the development. The proposals would have a greater impact on the openness of the greenbelt than the existing development and would fail to preserve the openness of the greenbelt. No very special circumstances have been demonstrated, and as such it would not fall within any exceptions set out in paragraphs 145 and 146 of the MPPF and would comprise inappropriate development in the greenbelt in conflict with policy RE2 and the MPPF 2018. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Peter Martin.
Thank you. Would you need to mention the area of great landscape value as well as being in the green belt? You need to put in references to that or repeat it for the AONB as well as the green belt. Would that be required?
Yes, that was the time. Yes, just to read that part out again. So the second reason for refusal captured the landscape character and scenic beauty of the AONB and the AGLV. Thank you.
Councillor Wheatley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know whether I missed it, but have we taken into account the dangerousness of the access to the site?
That's always a difficult one when our dear friends at County Highways say that it's perfectly safe, isn't it? But Councillor Martin.
Although I have complete sympathy with that, I have to say that I don't think that it would add to this. It would detract from the thing if we were to put it in. So I think if we've got, you see, I think we've put remoteness in. It's boosting the population, which is out of character with the AONB and the AGLV and the Greenbelt. I think that's where I would rest rather than try and add something which would be detrimental from an inspection point of view.
Good. So, members, the revised recommendation proposed by Councillor Martin and seconded by Councillor Follows, for the reasons that Rebecca has just expanded on, the recommendation is that permission be refused. All those in favour, please. That's unanimous. So that application is refused. Thank you, members of the public. Unless you're interested in watching the rest of the proceedings, those of you that were concerned with Thursday, feel free to leave if you so desire. Thank you. What's next? Shores. Now Bourne Road. Okay. Bourne Road. I think that was the result. Yeah. Right. Sorry, Councillor Bolton.
It is somewhat warm and stuffy in this room. Could officers address that?
Address it or undress it? Members, if the gentlemen or the ladies would like to remove their jackets, please feel free. But otherwise, I think Amy's going to come to your rescue, Councillor Bolton. Meanwhile, if we may, we'll move on to item A2, which is application reference WA/2018/0692, 23 Bourne Road, Farncombe, GU7 3NL, and Nicola is going to present this application to us. Nicola.
Thank you, Chairman. This application seeks planning permission for the erection of 3 dwellings, a religious meet. Oh, sorry. Let's see if I can do that. Better? Yeah? This application seeks planning permission for the erection of 3 dwellings, a religious meeting hall, extensions to existing shop and provision of office space on land to the west of Bourne Road in Farncombe. A number of updates have been circulated. These relate to the proposed conditions. Condition 1 was the correction of the date on a couple of plans and the addition of 4 plans showing the existing site layout, which were omitted. Condition 19 was the alteration of the text to specify the particular plan relating to the extension of the shop. And to formative 9, the text of this was altered to clarify the number and size of bins required. There is one verbal update. On page 30 of the report, the garden area to the rear of Unit 2 is described as being 70 metres squared and the garden area of Unit 3 as 66 metres squared. This is corrected to Unit 2 as 66 metres squared and the garden area of Unit 3 as 77 metres squared. This does not result in a change to the recommendation. The first slide shows a location plan. The application site, is it okay? Hear me? Is outlined in red and is located within the built-up area of Farncombe along Bourne Road. This area is predominantly residential, although the White Hart pub is located to the south-east of the site at the junction of Molyneux Road and Bourne Road. The application site under consideration is a commercial site and currently includes a number of single and 2-storey industrial buildings which previously housed a commercial bakery, which are currently vacant and unused and have been so for a number of years. It also includes a further building, a converted house, the ground floor of which was used for the retail bakery sales, and the first floor was a 1-bedroom flat. With regard to the commercial site, the planning history does not include any details of conditions that restrict the hours of operation of either the commercial or the retail parts of the business. This slide shows an aerial photograph, which clearly shows the site in context of the existing development. This building here is the existing retail shop with flat above. These show the single-storey industrial buildings, and this is the 2-storey commercial industrial building. The aerial photograph also shows the...
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, can I just dim the lights?
Sorry?
Ah.
Would you like me to just repeat what I did about the... No? Okay. The neighbouring developments also shown, namely the White Hart pub with car park, number 21 Bourne Road, which is a separate house, separate to the application site, a residential house, the electricity substation alongside the site with number 25 Bourne Road behind, number 27 Bourne Road, and the detached dwellings along Molyneux Road. This slide shows the existing site layout in more detail, with the shop and flat above in brown and the 2-storey commercial part of the building indicated. This slide shows the proposed site plan. The application proposes the following: demolition of existing industrial buildings, the retention of the existing shop, together with the construction of a rear 2-storey extension. The ground floor of this extension would be storage, and the first floor of the extension, welfare facilities for the staff. The first floor of the existing building is proposed for office use. The construction of a religious meeting house proposed for use by up to 45 people. A total of 10 car parking spaces within the main part of the site. 5
for the religious meeting house, 3 for the shop, and 2 for the office space. 1 disabled parking space would also be provided. The spaces would not be allocated to particular use, allowing potential cross-pollination of spaces. The application also includes the construction of 3 market 3-bedroom houses, 1 detached and 1 pair of semi-detached houses. 8 parking spaces will be provided for the residential part of the development, 3 for the detached dwelling and 1 of the semi-detached houses, and 2 spaces for the other semi-detached dwelling. The level of parking provision meets the council's adopted standards and no objection has been raised by County Highways. This slide shows the proposed elevations of the religious meeting hall. It's a relatively small scale, being 14.5 metres in depth at the longest point, 9.9 metres wide at the longest point, 3 metres to eaves, 6 metres to the top of the main part of the hip roof, with a decorative dovecot of 1.2 metres and a weathered vane of an additional 0.8 metres. The main entrance to the building will be from the front, from Bourne Road, with a secondary entrance on the south-east elevation within the site. Both of these entrances are provided by porches supported by timber columns with additional detailing for the front door. The design of this building has been amended in line with Council's Urban Design Officer comments, and officers satisfied the quality of the design is sufficiently high quality for a new community facility. This slide shows the floor plan of the proposed religious meeting house. It would consist of a single meeting room of 64 metres squared, designed to accommodate 45 people. It would also include a foyer and cloakroom area, bathroom facilities, and a small kitchen. This slide shows the elevations of the retail unit. The front elevation is fundamentally unchanged, including the side access to the front first floor. The extension to the rear would be 7.3 metres long and have a height to eaves of 4.75 metres, matching the existing building, and a height to ridge of 7.3. It would replace the 2-storey commercial extension to the shop, the 2-storey element of that part, which is currently 15 metres length and 6.5 metres in height to ridge. The applicant has provided proposals for the hours of use of the shop, which are Monday to Friday, 8:30 to 5 p.m, Saturday, 8:30 to 3 p.m, and closed on Sundays and bank holidays. This slide shows the proposed floor plans of the retail unit, the extension marked in green for storage and welfare. This slide shows the proposed elevations of the detached dwelling. It's a 3-bedroom detached dwelling. The garden area, not shown on this particular slide, is 80 metres square. It's the depth of which would be 10 metres. Officers consider this acceptable and provides for outdoor amenity space and washing and bin facilities. The internal space is 88 square metres and would meet government technical standards. Or it's been pointed out to me by Councillor Lee that one of the bedrooms, this bedroom 3, is 0.5 metres smaller than the specified standard. This slide shows the floor plans. It has 2 windows at first floor, both of which would be obscurely glazed and to non-primary accommodation. This slide shows the proposed elevations of the semi-detached dwellings. The roof line is hipped to reduce the bulk and includes Velux windows to provide light to upstairs bathrooms. This shows the floor plans, which are the same as the detached dwelling, and again the 3rd bedroom is 0.5 metres squared smaller than the space standards, although overall the building meets the standards. The garden areas would be 66 metres squared and 77 square metres, both of which are also 10 metres in depth. The next slide shows the relationship with existing buildings with number 21 Bourne Road. You can see the 2-storey commercial building and the existing retail buildings we retained marked in brown. This slide shows the 3D layout showing the relationship between the existing development in the vicinity and the proposed buildings. This slide shows the front elevation of the semi-detached houses will be set back 4 metres from the side elevation of number 21, when measured from a line taken from the side wall of this house, running parallel with the road. The side elevation of this dwelling would be set back 4 metres from the rear garden fence and 8 metres from the rear wall of number 21. This third elevation here shows that the proposed dwelling would not cross the 25-degree light line measured from a point 1 metre from ground on the potentially affected property, showing there would be no unacceptable loss of light to neighbouring windows. There's a series of photographs showing the existing site. Some of these are taken from the design access statement produced by the applicant, as my camera died when I was out. This shows the substation and number 25 to the rear of that, the bungalow, and the shop here with the existing buildings, the buildings to be demolished behind. This slide shows Molyneux Road looking northeast. This is number 21, and this fence line is predominantly the southeast boundary of the application site. This slide shows the development along Molyneux Road, and again, the fence line shows the southeast site boundary. This, again, another view from Molyneux Road, looking northwest, showing 21 Bourne Road to the right of the picture, and the two-storey existing commercial building, which is proposed to be demolished. Another picture of 21 Bourne Road here, which is the neighbour, which is not part of the application site, and the existing shop. This part of it to be retained. This site shows number 25 Bourne Road. It's a detached single-storey bungalow, as of course single-storey bungalows are. So this slide shows photographs of the existing buildings to be proposed to be demolished. With regard to this application, with regard to the matters of principal and technical opinion, the lawful use of the site is mixed industrial with retail and was previously used as a commercial bakery with shop retail sales. As previously described, the site is not currently in use and hasn't been used since the early 2000s. A marketing report was submitted by the applicant, which has been reviewed by the Council's estate officers, who found the losses commercial land to be acceptable. The other issues are discussed in the officer's report. With regard to the matters of judgment, they have been touched on within this presentation and are discussed in more detail within that report. Therefore, subject to conditions 2 to 18 and conditions 20 to 28 within the report and conditions 1 and 19 of the addendum, for the reasons set out within the officer's report, this application is recommended for approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Nicola. We have public speaking on this application as well, and I would firstly invite the objector, Seb Bone, to address us, please. Mr. Bone, I take it the procedure has been explained to you, and you know you have 4 minutes from the time when you start speaking. Thank you. If you wish to, in your 4 minutes, yes, feel free, yes.
Good evening. In order to be democratic, my fellow objectors and I have spoken to many residents, including all who border the site. Only one person does not object robustly, and I'd just like to add the site closed 2 years ago. The meeting hall would be very well used. The brethren meet every day of the week and worship several times on a Sunday, explaining the unsociably early proposed start time of 6 a.m. If clauses 18, 19 and 25 in the recommendations of the officer's report do not allow for deliveries, retail activities or construction on a Sunday, why is the noise and disruption of a large number of people coming and going from 6 a.m. to 5 p.m. going to be permitted? We strongly object to the change of use to D1. No business under the current usage would be allowed to trade at such times. 6 a.m. on a Sunday morning is just too early in a residential area. We also doubt the hall will be used by the wider community, as stated in the design statement. You may have noticed the bouncers on the gates at the Brethren Place of Worship in New Pond Road, less than a mile away. Surely this huge site can continue to cater for their needs in the locality. A convenience store is not required. There are already 2 such shops 200 yards away and a further 4 within a 5 to 10 minute walk. The nearby shops have a well-documented problem with antisocial behaviour and a terrible litter problem. We already have enough issues with the noise from the pub, and we note there is no provision for a litter bin. We do appreciate that the proposed opening times are not much longer than the existing bakery ware, but the problems will still exist. There is no mention of the type of business intended for the office part of the development or any proposed times of occupation or deliveries. This in itself should be grounds to defer this application. It could have a huge effect on noise, privacy, light pollution and residential amenity, and surely that is in breach of the local plan 2002. The residential development is generally welcomed, but some residents are very concerned about their loss of light, and also the parking in front of the houses seems optimistic at best. Parking and traffic is a major concern. The parking on site allows for 10 spaces plus 1 disabled. The application states there will be 6 employees on site that will need to park, and homeowners from the new residential development can also use the communal car park. Therefore, almost all visitors will have to park on street in already congested roads, also used by commuters. Bourne Road is a very busy thoroughfare, heavily used by pedestrians and school children, with 3 schools in close proximity. Traffic speeds up very quickly as the humps on Green Lane end. Currently, motorists park only on the west side of the road. Terrible bottlenecks occurred when the bakery was in operation, and people parked on the east side. We witnessed numerous accidents. Perhaps extra parking restrictions on the east side would help. Exiting our driveways was also extremely hazardous, and the residents have already had site visitors blocking their driveways. McCoy's Limited, owners of the White Hart pub, object to this proposal, as they are very concerned that visitors will constantly try to park in their car park on Molyneux Road. The parking guidelines may just have been met, but we have a greater local knowledge, and we all know it's going to be a huge problem. The consensus would prefer a purely residential development, like the nearby one on the junction of Bourne Road and George Road. Even the applicant's marketing report stated the site would be much better suited to a residential development. Given the current demand for housing and the ongoing use of greenfield sites, the public will be horrified that this prime brownfield site is still being overlooked. Thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Bone. Now invite Mike Tibbett, a supporter of the scheme.
Good evening. First of all, I'd like to say we've very much appreciated the very positive and proactive engagement we've enjoyed throughout this application with Nicola and her fellow colleagues. We've been through a pre-application process, and then actually during the application itself we've had numerous minor changes and revisions, enhancements to the scheme. You know, a lot of things are actually been suggested by the planning department to improve the scheme, so we very much appreciate that. And we feel therefore that it's very much in keeping with national and local planning guidance. That is clearly the intention of the NPPF and so on. And as I say, the positive and proactive engagement is to be recommended. Now, the existing site clearly is unsuitable for the previous use, otherwise it wouldn't have closed several years ago. We understand it was actually, you know, quite run down for some time even before that. The resulting site clearly is a rather unattractive site in the locality, and there's a great opportunity here to replace it with something much more appropriate. So going on to the proposal in some detail. So the existing A1 retail unit is to be retained, refurbished and extended, enlarged, sorry. So no change from its current use. No specific tenant has been identified for that particular unit. So it won't necessarily be a convenience store, and we think local market forces will dictate what does eventually take place on that particular location. In addition, the office over the top of the retail unit will be retained. So we've got some additional employment opportunities there, which I think should be welcomed within the community. It's all very well suggesting that should only be housing on the site, but we all know we need a mix in our communities to provide employment and such like, as well as just housing. The existing commercial units clearly will be demolished, and then in their place will be 3 much-needed residential units, very similar to other houses within Molyneux Road. So we would suggest they are very much appropriate for that area. Very similar grain of design, parking and such like. So they're very much in keeping with that particular road and immediate area. But it's all part of a mixed development that we think suits the overall area. Finally, the D1 use, the Christian Meeting Hall, is to be constructed for use by the Plymouth Brethren, as we've already heard, together with the associated parking to the rear. Meetings are actually likely to place, so I'm informed, around 3 times per week, not constantly all day, every day, as seems to be being suggested. And for those of you not familiar with the Plymouth Brethren, they're a peaceful, law-abiding, hard-working Christian individuals with strong ethics and morals. And whilst they may seem to be keeping themselves, they're known for their positive contribution to society. So I think the suggestion that there could be lots of noise and so on perhaps is unfounded. Now, parking is clearly one of the issues that have been raised here. For the various users of site has been considered in detail. We've obviously engaged with the planners and obviously highways experts and so on. They're all happy that it does meet with the policies that have been put forward. And if indeed there are issues with the traffic there, perhaps traffic calming is what's required rather than just blanketly removing parking on the street, as seems to be suggested. Finally, we're happy to submit a construction management statement agreed with Waverley Council to ensure the site is developed in a considerate manner, which I think should help to really absolve some of the fears of the local residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tibbett. Members. Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of points on this. First one, I'd just like to point out just some context. I'm amazed nobody from Godalming Town Council in this room brought this in for discussion, because I think it probably should have been by one of the ward councillors so that the parish could have rendered an opinion. I'm sure they would have had one. Secondly, I agree with the objector that I can't understand how we'd be okay with that number of people, and I don't think we need to have any comment as to what individual types of people would be doing on the site. Volume of people alone at that time of day will cause noise, and I think we need to be looking at that quite carefully. And also, I actually agree that there should be probably more affordable housing on the site instead of this. I would just also ask the officers for context: is the site on New Park Road going to New Pond Road going to continue to exist as well as this site? Do we know, or is that something completely unknown at this point?
I don't think that's really a matter for this committee, is it Councillor Follows? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you. I think my issues with this application are similar to an application that came before this committee 2 or maybe 3 years ago on Catshaw Lane for a similar religious building. And the issue then, as now, I think, is a complete lack of parking. This is going to be a hall which apparently takes 45 people, and it's being proposed to give them 5 car parking spaces. Yes, there may be another 5 if it's not being used on a Sunday by other people, but as some of the speakers have said, you know, the car park might be open to the residents of the houses that are proposed to be built or their visitors. So the likelihood is there won't be more than 5 car parking spaces, which for 45 people seems to me the wrong thing. We had a similar issue, as I said, with Catshaw Lane, and I think certainly the early start time seems to be of concern, because I think at 6 a.m. in the morning, the last thing you want is a steady stream of vehicles and slamming doors and general chatter as people go about their business. So that would be my principal concern. Whether or not the shop has will work is going to be up to Newmarket forces, as we've been heard. The 3 houses are certainly welcome, but again, yes, a lack of affordability on this site is a concern. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bolton.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to take up a point which Councillor Reynolds made. This business of opening from 6 a.m. to 5 p.m. on Sundays and bank holidays, have officers agreed this with the applicant? Was there any discussion about different hours? And surprised that anyone would manage to go to a church or religious establishment at 6 a.m. Is there any possible change to these hours? Thank you.
Officers, would you like to address that question?
The hours were specified within the application form as those which were needed for the particular group that was making the application. I understand that, well, with regard to bank holidays, that includes Christmas and New Year, so that's why that was included. The hours were requested by the applicant as being needed for, requested. The hours were specified by the applicant as being needed for that particular church meeting house. So that was the hours that was considered by officers.
Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chairman. As a matter of fact, I did call this matter in some time ago. Very valid points from the gentleman speaking for the objectors. I would suggest that the current proposals are really an overdevelopment of this site. I would fully support what Councillor Reynolds has said regarding parking. The residents know there will be problems. Those of us who know the area know there will be problems. Parking will go on the streets. There's a question of public safety, children, residents, etc. There's also loss of some commercial use on the property and therefore employment. The rail question, as mentioned on, I think it's page 47, is, does the adverse impacts outweigh whatever the proposed benefits are? And I'll be very interested to hear from our other councillors on that point. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Holder.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate that I'm not allowed to vote, but I still think I can speak. I'm really concerned about most of the objections appear to be in the view of the noise and inconvenience of the convenience store. And I note on page 38 that the proposed opening hours are 8:30 in the morning to 5 p.m. Monday to Friday, Saturday 8:30 to 3 p.m. on Saturday, and not opening at all on Sunday. But it doesn't say that this is actually a condition of the application. And so I'm wondering if it can be included as a condition.
Councillor, it was included as a condition. I can find the number for it. We're proposing a condition. Yes, in fact 19. Thank you.
Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I am concerned about that 6 a.m. start in the heart of a residential community. I don't quite see why that should definitely be a requirement. That is a bit disturbing. Now, another thing that Nicola mentioned was this aspect of the room dimensions. And yes, I still know that the design guide isn't accepted policy in Waverley at the moment, but we do have those bedroom threes, as they're called, being substandard as far as their area is concerned. So I would therefore claim, and I would always go forward on this basis, that if it falls short of those minimum standards which are deemed to be right for reasonable living and proper living, then they're not they're 3-bedroom properties, but not 4 persons. They're really sized for 3 persons, so that 3rd bedroom is actually a box room. And that's how I will look at things going forward. And I just don't think that if minimum areas are not provided, and bearing in mind builders are plus or minus a brick in terms of their dimensions, or could be, I don't think that we should be toying with on the border of any particular area or dimension. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Follows.
So I just quickly disagree with Councillor Holder, I'm afraid. I think that the convenience store issue is an issue, but it's secondary to the main one. And as much as we have to possibly tiptoe around the issue, we are addressing here the harm caused by the use of it for religious purposes at that time of the day versus the harm to the community, well, versus denying them that fact. So I think really, balancing that harm, I think there is more material harm to the community by allowing that to be used at 6 o'clock in the morning, especially as there is an alternate facility that they currently already use in very close proximity. So unless that is changing, which I know is not part of this application, I think actually the harm to the community is greater than the benefit to this community, this religious community in this instance, and we should be voting to object on those grounds.
Thank you. Councillor James.
Thank you, Chairman. It's on the same one. On condition 27, which outlines the timing, which says Monday to Friday, Sundays and bank holidays, and not at all on Saturdays. And then the reasons are, it's in the interest of the residential amenities. Well, if it's of interest to the residential amenities, that it's not open on a Saturday, how come it's convenient and it's everything else at a 6 o'clock on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Sunday, Christmas Day, Boxing Day, and every other day? It's then okay for the residents, but it's not actually okay for the residents at any time on a Saturday. So the actual reasons laid out in the agenda paper actually don't make any sense. And I've never come across a condition that we've allowed somebody to open at 6, but the shop can't open literally next door, or deliveries, for the interests of the residents. They are both the same. So if it's not in the interest of the residents the shop opens early and deliveries, it cannot be in the interest of the residents that anything. I'm not worried whether it's a place of worship, mind you, a place of worship but has a kitchen and everything else. So, you know, most churches don't actually have a kitchen. They have another building that has that. But that's irrelevant, and it could be any building, but it's the timing, and I really do object to a 6 o'clock, because if it's not convenient for a shop, it's not convenient for whatever goes on in the building.
Thank you. Councillor Barnes.
It's a difficult subject to talk about with regard to the users. I don't know the detail enough to make absolutely sound comments, but Councillor Follows asked the question of whether New Pond Road was going to stay open or close. I think you'll find that New Pond Road actually can cope with up to 3,000 worshippers. It's a massive building. I was invited, along with many, many other residents, to actually visit the area. I thought I'd get a chance to look inside their I don't think they call it a church, but a meeting room or whatever. I found that we were all sitting outside in a marquee, given burgers and chips, and given a few leaflets about the religious beliefs, etc., of the Plymouth Brethren. And I asked whether we could have a chance to look around the church, and they said no, but you might be able to arrange to come back on a suitable Sunday or another day. So we weren't welcome, and this happened, and I have experience of the same groups of people who are local residents who tend not to communicate, and of course the speaker said this evening they're perhaps seen not to be communicative, and indeed when I knocked on one door they told me, so do you vote? They said, we don't vote, we pray for you. But that's by the by. I think probably the site that is being talked about, the shop will be run by the Plymouth Brethren, and therefore they would restrict their hours to the hours that we're talking about, because that is the hours that they believe are correct to work, and that outside those hours they have the opportunity to go to their meeting room in whatever prayer groups or whatever it might be. Therefore, you've got a new enclave working on their own to a degree, but of course inviting new members of the community to join their group at some stage. It's got an interesting history, but it's difficult to talk in any great detail without appearing to be discriminatory. And I'm trying to keep away from that. So I think it's inappropriate in the sense that you're coming into a local community like this certainly with the fact that New Pond Road site is actually quite, if you drive past there regularly, you'll see most of the time the gates are locked. It's not used extensively throughout the week, but it is used, obviously, and extensively on certain days when people drive from as far as Portsmouth, for instance, I believe, to actually go to visit there as their place to visit. So I'm uneasy about what is coming forward with this site, and I think residential development would probably be better.
Okay, I think, as you said, we need to view this application on planning terms and not on any other, and I don't think we can really, we're not in the business of second guessing what's going to happen. But Councillor Follows, you wish to add something?
On 2 points, Councillor Byron raised there. Firstly, I don't think we should be assuming that it should be used, the convenience store is going to be used by that part of the community. The supporter of the application said it was subject to market forces, so we should assume it could be used by anybody for any purpose that complies with that use. Secondly, the comment that you made about not being able to use the site or go around the existing site, I think contradicts with what the intended use of this new facility for other community uses. I think if you are restricted using the site for whatever reason, I don't think we're going to be using it for other things in the community. So I'd like officers to comment on that. And secondly, taking out the use of the site completely, and going back to what Councillor James said, I don't think it's appropriate for anybody to be using the site at 6 o'clock in the morning. And that's irrelevant of who's using it.
Thank you. Councillor Peter Martin.
Thank you. I find this application very confusing and very difficult to assimilate and take a view on. Of course, what we need to be doing is comparing what could be allowed under existing uses and planning consent, which is shops and bakeries and so on and so forth. So we tend to look at the change of use and the extra parking compared with what it is now when it's virtually unused to what it's proposed, when what we should be doing is looking at what it would have been 20 years ago when it was being properly used as a bakery and so forth, together with what it would be after a planning application, if a planning application were to be successful. So that makes life quite difficult in terms of trying to make that reasonable comparison. However, having said that, I get further confused when I go to page 38 and 39 in the report, where we're talking about noise and disturbance. And when we compare the retail unit with the church or with the meeting house, and of course the proposed opening hours of this retail unit dovetail very nicely, don't they, with the meeting house, i.e. when the meeting house is being used, the retail shop is not being used, with early finishes Monday to Friday, definitely closed on Sundays and bank holidays and so forth. So that is a curious position. I can't help feeling that if it were a real standalone retail unit subject to market forces, they'd be back very quickly to say, can't operate within these hours, we need some longer hours, otherwise we're not viable. And again, I share the concerns of many with a 6 o'clock start, although I wonder whether that's just opening up and a few people going in to sort things out for the day rather than all the worshippers arriving at 6 o'clock. I don't know. It does seem to me that to have a substantial meeting hall right here in the midst of a private residential area is probably a tough proposition, together with all the associated parking and noise. And we have got precedent from what we decided 2 or 3 years ago in Caddershaw Lane, where there was a proposition for some sort of meeting house with extensive use on Sundays and parking and so forth. and at that time we did say no to that. So although I've got a degree of reluctance, I think I'm inclined to go with saying no on the grounds of noise, disturbance, and I don't think a very complete proposition. However, I would like to understand from officers as to what they feel as to whether, clearly with this group, the committee here I've got lots of doubts and concerns, and I would perhaps like to hear more from the officers as to the reasonableness of our doubts and concerns versus what may happen, for instance, if this were taken to an appeal. Thank you.
Officers, would you like to respond?
With regard to noise from the meeting hall and other sites, we've got... yes, of course, sorry. With regard to the noise potentially from the meeting hall and from the other elements of the proposal, the Council Environmental Service officers have come up with a number of conditions relating to noise, relating to issue of noise from the buildings, the noise conditions at the exterior of existing and proposed residential dwellings, and interior noise levels. So we were conscious of the potential impact of noise on residents. With regard to the early start, given the fact that it was a religious meeting house, that was why the Sunday hours were considered to be appropriate. And the fact it's a relatively small building, 64 metres squared to accommodate 45 people, that the number of people didn't seem to officers to be considerably large so as to warrant undue concern at the time of vehicle movements coming in. And I would come back to the point, I would say again that Surrey Highways officers haven't objected to the application. They've agreed that the number of parking spaces are compliant with standards, and they have indicated that parking along the road would be acceptable. Thank you, Chairman.
Members, any further comments before we move to the recommendation? Right, where are we? Oh, sorry, Councillor Bolton.
Thank you. I get the feeling that a number of members do not support this. If we were minded to reject it, would our objections stand up against appeal? I believe Councillor Tom Martin is very keen on this type of approach. Could officers comment?
Officers, would you like to comment or think about it?
Councillors, I think that a case regarding residential amenity, perhaps by reason of the hours of operation of the religious meeting room, potential, so if we had a reason for refusal, perhaps propose that the... Can I start again, please? Yes, probably better. Sorry, 1 second. With regard to residential amenity, if we had a reason for refusal, perhaps something of the order that the proposed religious meeting room, by reason of the hours of operation, would be harmful to the residential amenity of neighbouring dwellings. I don't think we would necessarily be able to support, to satisfactorily support a reason for refusal based on parking, given that it complies with our standards and that the County Highways hasn't objected. But in relation to residential amenity from hours of operation, I think we could provide that as a reason for refusal. Thank you, Chairman.
Just out of interest, do any of the local ward councillors know if Binscombe Church has restrictions on opening times, for want of a better word? No. I don't think churches generally have restrictions, do they? Don't know. Councillor Tom Martin.
I wonder if it will help members. I have looked up the application that we talked about in Cattershall Road, and although the council refused that, it was actually overturned on appeal. And in particular, the inspector was not content about our argument over parking arrangements, which is one of the objections we put forward. So I would strongly urge that we don't comment on parking, because I don't think that would stack up on appeal. With regards to site, I appreciate the difficulties that we've got with this and the hours of operation. I think there are other religious buildings in residential roads, Carlos Street with Kingdom Hall, Binscombe Church, they are all surrounded by residential properties. So I think I think the timing is the critical aspect of it. And I don't know if officers could comment specifically around the time, and whether, I mean, I think that's really the sole reason that I could hang my hat on for refusal, is the early operating. I appreciate that if it was an operational bakery, bakeries start early, but they don't usually work on Sundays. So you could expect early movements weekdays, Monday to Saturday perhaps, but probably not on a Sunday. So I'm interested to understand the relationship with the timings that we're looking at specifically with this application, what is before us.
With relation to timings and the commercial unit, there's no current restrictions in the planning history related to conditions to restrict times of operation or working hours on the site. The application considered the timings that were put forward, and that's what has been considered. We haven't considered different timings, as that wasn't requested by the applicant. But like I say, there's no current restrictions on hours of operation for the current site.
Okay, Councillor Follows.
Just for the information of the Chamber, just a quick look at the next 3 months for Binscombe Church and in Farncombe, and nothing happens before 8 o'clock in the morning in any of those things. So although there are no restricted hours, clearly by convention they don't do anything that early deliberately.
Okay, it's interesting that the officers' report only mentions Sunday morning at 6 a.m. and yet they've asked for 6 o'clock right the way through the week.
At 6 p.m. through the week. 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. through the week. And 6 a.m. on Sundays.
Oh, okay. Councillor James.
Thank you for allowing me to come back. Looking at the conditions, they're conditions for the shop, they're conditions for the place of religious worship. There are no conditions on the time for the 2 business units, so presumably they could come at 6 o'clock in the morning and park their cars, and they could work on Sundays. I can't see them anywhere. I've looked everywhere. It just only has the conditions for the D1 use. And the shop is 18.
Condition 19. Is that what you're looking for, the retail? Or
Yeah, that's the retail.
Oh, you're looking for the office above
Yeah, the
it.
office ones.
Okay.
So, presumably they could, if they're busy, they could work on a Sunday and use up their car parking spaces. And because they're not allocated the car parking spaces, as everybody knows, if the people who live in Molyneux Road or the other one go to work and commute, then at the weekends, or they might work actually on a Saturday, or they'll be out shopping, but certainly on Sunday they'll all be home and they'll all be parked in the car park at the back by the church. So there won't be anywhere for anybody to park. But there are no conditions for the business office units.
Comment, yes? Sorry, go on.
Just with regard to the office use, it's as far as I'm aware, it's one office use. There's one single space for office, and we raised the matter with environmental service whether a condition to restrict the hours for the office would be required, and consider that given the small scale of it, that it wouldn't be something that we would normally seek.
Councillor Reynolds. And then Councillor Bolt.
So I think we just seem to be going around in circles. The issue is really the chance of 45 people coming at 6 a.m. in the morning, not one person going to his office to do a bit of work at 6 a.m. on a Sunday, which I think is highly unlikely. But I work in a serviced offices. I can go at any time of the day, but I can promise you we don't make any noise if we go there because you go to work. But I think the issue is you know, a large number of people coming at 6 a.m. on a Sunday or a bank holiday. And I think if we could change, put a restriction in to make that 7:30 or 8 o'clock, it would probably make this application a lot easier.
Officers, is it worth considering deferring this application for further discussions with the applicants regarding this opening time? Because that seems to be the main stumbling block. As Councillor Martin pointed out, we can't really refuse it on parking grounds because they meet the required thing. Can I propose that we defer this application for further consideration by the officers, seconded by Councillor Lee? All those in favour?
Except obviously the councillor.
Councillor Holder, yes, yeah. Okay, that's carried then. Thank you. So, moving swiftly on, we have item B1, which is reference WA 2018-1203. I'll just give these gentlemen a chance to leave if they so desire. I was misreading. I thought they wanted it 6 a.m. No. Right, this shouldn't take too long. Item B1, application reference WA 2018-1203, numbers 1, 4, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 38 and 39, Amberley Road, Milford, GU8 5ED, and Chris is going to present this application.
Thank you, Chairman. This application seeks planning permission for the replacement of the existing aluminium windows with UPVC windows on a number of residential units. There are no updates since the writing of the report, so we'll run through the details of the application. This is the location plan. You can see there are the properties that are affected are masonettes, so the new windows are either on the ground floor or the first floor of the building, depending on which property it is that's being proposed to change. The site's located within Milford, and there's surrounded by other residential units, all of which have a mixture of window types. These are the proposed elevations of plots 1, 2, 3, and 4. Plots 1 and 4 of this elevation are proposed to change. The other elevations are all very similar. There's not a great deal of change in the elevation. The windows are replacing different materials, but in many respects like for like. These are some photographs of the buildings that are affected. The photograph at the bottom shows plot number 16 on the ground floor, which is proposed to change to a white UPVC window, and the photograph on the right-hand side shows number 1 Amberley Road on the ground floor, and at the top of the slide we have another of the properties that's proposed to be altered. This slide just sets out the matters of technical opinion and matters of judgment. We have in terms of technical opinion, the principle of development, and in terms of matters of judgment, we have the impact on the AONB, AGLV, and residential amenity. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chris. Members, do we really need to discuss this? Agreed? Agreed. Thank you. We have no reason to exclude the press or the public, so members, thank you for your time and safe journey home.